Alright, so what I'd like to do, this is section 2. I'd like to spend a little bit more time with you all just getting a very brief and quick overview of what Bitcoin is. I say quick, that's relative, I realize. To some of you, maybe you're familiar with Bitcoin already. This is going to seem very quick. I've encountered people who have heard of Bitcoin, but when I talk about digital cash or peer-to-peer transactions, there's so much jargon in lingo that gets lost in translation that we don't even really know what we're talking about anymore. So what I want to do is I want to go over a couple things here in this section to make sure that it's very, very simple and easy to understand what Bitcoin is and how it works. And I'm not going to go into extreme detail. At the end of this section, I will provide links and I will provide resources that if it's your desire to look into cryptography and how blockchains are built and what their infrastructure looks like and all of that. If that's your interest, fantastic. I have resources. I'll send them your way. Most people, it's kind of like email, right? I know how to send an email. Here's a picture of me. Whoop. Oh man, yikes. I don't look very good, do I? Let's say I wanted to send a message to my Uncle Rob over in Russia, which is where he spent a decent amount of his life. That's not a crown, that's my hair. Yikes. Anyway, I want to send a message over to my Uncle Rob in Russia, and I've got some really, really important stuff to share with him in this letter, and I want it to get to him. To be totally honest with you, if you remember when email rolled out, I do. I was kind of the generation, as a millennial, I was the generation that grew up still sending these out. We still had pen pals in elementary school. And then all of a sudden, email started rolling out. And here's my Uncle Rob over in Russia, across the entire opposite side of the world. What was unbelievably fascinating is instead of sending him a piece of handwritten mail, I could now send him an email, right? The only thing that I needed to know about email was not how it worked, but I needed to know that it worked. And that was really it, right? I didn't need to know all the coding. I have no idea what happens within an HTTP protocol in order for me to send encrypted data to my uncle in Russia. I have no idea, and I honestly don't care. What I want to do is pull up my Gmail account, see that there's, the section for who it's to, the subject, and then I get to put in all the content, all the fun stuff in here, right? Fill in all the information of what I want to send to my uncle. And then I press the send button, and it goes all the way to my uncle. And it happens in literally seconds, right? Versus, this traditional way of sending a letter to my uncle that took sometimes weeks to get to him. I'm not the kind of guy that wants to know what's going on in code for this stuff. I don't care. I'm way too simple, not my interest. But what does interest me is how doing something like this has literally changed the way we communicate, does it not? So that's kind of the approach I have here with Bitcoin. If you want the extremities on how the code is, and that, for me, that's not my forte. But I do encourage you, if that's what you're interested in, go for it. We're going to spend a lot more big picture, macro perspective of how this stuff works. So, in order to start, I am going to pull up a screenshot that I took of something referred to as Satoshi's white paper. Okay, Satoshi's white paper is basically his proposal for starting Bitcoin. I'm sorry, kind of lost my train of thought there. A guy named Satoshi Nakamoto, right? You can see it right here. Satoshi, oh, that is not a pen. Satoshi Nakamoto. Boop. I don't know if you can still email this account. Interesting. Maybe I'll try it, but I am 99% sure a billion people have tried to email him, and he's not going to respond to you. But nevertheless, a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto shows up on the scene. Okay, nobody knows who he is. To this day, nobody has any idea who he is. This guy, Satoshi Nakamoto, could be a group of people. Nobody knows. Could be one single person. Nobody knows. We don't know if the guy is alive or dead today. We don't know anything about him. And I honestly think the curious, I don't know. I guess curious is a good word. The curious side of me, the curious side of Nick is saying, Nick, find out who this guy is. Wouldn't it be so cool to know who Satoshi Nakamoto is? Find out who he is. He's the guy that created Bitcoin. Find out who he is. And then I think to myself, you know what, honestly, and I think you'll see why here with me in a little bit, I think one of the best things that ever happened to Bitcoin is that we have no idea who this guy is. We have no idea who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and I hope we never do. And you'll see why. We're going to talk about concepts called decentralization, and don't let these words scare you. They're actually very easy to understand. But nevertheless, this guy Satoshi Nakamoto starts sending out emails, and you can Google all of this. This isn't like private information to me. If you're interested, Google Satoshi Nakamoto's email correspondence, and I promise you 35 links will pop up, probably more than that, and it will provide you literal copies of his emails that he sent to other people trying to figure out how to develop this idea called Bitcoin. All right? So, after having several email correspondence with some peers of his, he published this thing called a white paper. And of course, he titled it Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. What I would encourage you to do is Google Bitcoin white paper and read through it. If you're like me, you're not a coder, there's a lot of math stuff in there that he goes through. It's just not my language. Again, I just don't understand. No problem. But I understand the ideas. I understand the philosophy. So I get what he's getting at. But there's a couple things that I want to point out to you in the lecture here. And then we're actually going to get into Bitcoin in a little bit. But you're going to see a lot of this stuff right here. Right off the bat, Satoshi Nakamoto is mentioning financial institutions. That's significant. Don't when you read through something like that in the first sentence and you're seeing that Satoshi's interest here is a peer-to-peer version of electronic cash, basically allowing payments to be done and transmitted electronically without going through a financial institution. This is really, 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 really important. No financial institutions. Mind you, it's 2019, right? It's 2009 at the time that I believe that he published this. Most, if not all, of our transactions today are done and verified via financial institutions, banks, right? You have a card, you swipe it. I think the majority of transactions done in the United States are actually done via a debit card or a credit card. Across the world, I think in Japan, the last stat that I heard was that 95% of all transactions done in Japan are done digitally, meaning they're not using paper or coined currency. It's all digital, right? And I think Satoshi Nakamoto knew full well that electronic cash was coming, right? That's the whole thesis of Bitcoin, is that he's trying to create electronic cash. What he doesn't want is financial institution involvement to verify what's going on the digital ledger. We're going to get to exactly what that means here in a bit. I just want you to focus on this, that in Satoshi's thesis of using digital money, he doesn't want financial institutions being the focal point of authorizing transactions. Okay, that's what I want you to get from this picture. Next picture I have here basically proves the same point. This here is referred to something as the Genesis block. And all I did was I just Googled Genesis block, and this is just a Wikipedia thing that I cut out. And you're going to see that in the Genesis block there is a note within it. And this is what the note says. So I want to draw your attention to. There's a ton more fascinating information about the Genesis block. You can Google it, look it up. But this is where I want to draw your attention. Because again, this is something written by Satoshi Nakamoto. This is the note that he puts in there. The time is the 3rd of January 2009. Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. Alright? Right here. Banks. Financial institutions. The Genesis block refers to the first block mined in the Bitcoin protocol. Okay? The very first block. And we're going to get to what block means. You might be like, what is a block? And what? Genesis just means first. And block refers to a huge chunk of information, okay, that gets stored in this block. All right? Boom, 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 my fantastic artistic skills. The Genesis block is the first block ever mined and completed in the Bitcoin ledger. Okay? In that first block, mined and completed by Satoshi Nakamoto, he puts a timestamp and a note that January 3rd, Chancellor on brink of a second bailout for banks. Don't ignore that. Banks and financial institutions, let's piece this all together here. And we will here in just a little bit, but this is where I want to begin with you. Actually, in section 3, I'm going to spend an entire section on talking about banking system. Remember, the importance and the meaning of something is determined by its context. And Satoshi is not just giving us clues. He's telling us what his motive is for creating Bitcoin. Banks, financial institutions. It's not going to work as the world transitions to digital cash. He's not interested in banks and financial institutions being at the center of authorizing transactions. All right, so like I said, I'm going to continue on in this section talking a little bit more about what Bitcoin is, and then section 3, I'm actually going to spend an entire section talking about what banks have been up to and why Satoshi has this in mind, that he is creating Bitcoin with the idea of the banking sector.